Now, something you've mentioned, and we talked about the Spartan, vases and so forth, but you have mentioned a couple of times, including that example where you've done this external research. You've looked at articles and journals, and I'd love for you to elaborate on that because I think that's a key way to differentiate yourself across a multitude of subjects, including English as well.
Yeah,
So, what
yeah,
was the
yeah.
extent of that? Was that something you found yourself doing all the time, that you were always reading up on these extra articles? And then what was your process for extracting that and using it in your own work?
I wasn't always reading up on this. This was more so later in the year. So as the year's going, obviously I'm just trying to learn the basics. And that's really important because if I didn't know, what was, for example, well, my modern history teacher did PowerPoint slides. If I didn't know that, if I didn't know what was in the slides, which was like the general detail and some specific detail about the subject I'm studying, then, I'd be completely out of it. But in the latter stages, as I said earlier, as I've been on top of getting my work done and I've been on top of doing my notes, even if sometimes I was quite inefficient with my notes, I'll admit. For example, at the start of the year, I was handwriting them, which I really recommended. Then I got my handwritten notes and typed them up. And then I turned those typed up notes often into essay plans or other sort of plans. So it wasn't quite inefficient, but I guess it helped me learn it in many ways because I was getting that, really working that info into my head. So as I'd got the general basics down, as in the lead up to exams, I could really do some extension reading. And what that would look like is even things surprisingly for history like Wikipedia, not like being, the fool who believes everything on Wikipedia, but even just having like a skim read over an article. And then like if there's something which has a citation, going and looking at the citations and reading through that, or putting in a few general sort of search terms into JSTOR to try and find articles. And this is something I found has also given me an edge already as I'm about to commence uni, because I already have quite good processing skills for reading lots of information and whittling it down and trying to find the right sort of sources, especially in a subject like law. And I'm also majoring in history. So being able to consume these really extensive readings and pull out what's really matters is something that will help you later on. Another example of these sort of extension readings would be in English, where I really loved Mod B because it's about critical study. So you do need to bring in some sort of critical lens and some sort of higher order lens. What I really loved was going to find not necessarily people who had written criticism about my text, though I did read some of that as well. I read articles about my text, but also finding philosophers in the same genre. So my text was a postmodernist one, analysis of the floating world. And so finding postmodernist philosophers who were obviously part of that, intellectual movement, and trying to see, can I draw a link here between this text and like Michel Foucault or something like that, something really crazy that, like a link which others may not have drawn. And so being able to experiment with these higher order ideas was also really fun, because I remember once I was reading about a few different postmodernist philosophers, and I remember once sitting going, yes, when I found this beautiful quote from Lacan or something, which just perfectly worked with what I was trying to say about analysis of the floating world, because they are part of the same intellectual thing. And I think it made it more real. Like when you say that the text you're studying is postmodernist, what does that even mean? When I was actually reading postmodernists who weren't writing about this text, it was like the ideas were working together, the concepts were working together. Yeah, using things like JSTOR, even just general Google searches for academic sources or sources which do lead to or have proper citation to other academic sources is really helpful. Yeah, for those extension readings.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that's something that a lot of the high achievers tend to do. And that's why I asked the question, because if you can get used to just you can start with a simple Google search, like you said, read your summaries, go to your Wikipedias, but then if you can go the next level and go to something like JSTOR or even Google Scholar, I find is a good one to get you started. That'll give you lots of links, and you just type in your text name or whatever you want to research. and then maybe doing a couple of other keywords, like for instance, an artist, the floating world, postmodernism. You know, you put in something like that, and then you go to those things, and you start to figure out the process, and you get good, as you said, at reading the whole thing and then actually extracting, you know, a couple of key points that you can work into your piece. So I think that's a really key thing that a lot of the highest achievers will do. So anyone watching, even if you don't consider yourself a high achiever, you should be doing as much as you can that resembles what a high achiever would do, right? To give yourself the best shot. So that is a really good practical thing that you can all be doing,
especially in that, as I said, in the later stages. So don't because otherwise you'll just feel out of your depth if you're immediately going on to something hyper specific about a text and you still haven't learned like what the plot is or something, or the themes are. So in the lead up to your trials, and if you're doing an assessment about a particular, like an essay about a particular part of it, in the lead up that in particular, then putting in that extra detail.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. So obviously the order is important, and you'll just confuse yourself if you start with a really complex, you know, journal or article online versus just understanding the key themes and the plot. So that's a great point.